And I welcome you also very, very much. I also really welcome this conference. It has been fantastic so far. Really, really great contributions. My first sentence would have been to explain what I do in life, but you already took care of that. I also must say it's really wonderful to see representatives of the EU supervisory authorities in this room, representatives of the Commission, representatives of national authorities, and many others. So this gathering here, I think, is quite unique. And I think we could really use this opportunity to address the big elephant in the room. And it came up just before, and namely, the EU supervisory authorities are called ESAs. The EFTA surveillance authority is called ESA. We need to work that out. And I would suggest, first of all, EFTA Surveillance Authority was first. Second, we are in the EFTA house. So this afternoon, ESA means ESA. Then I also really appreciated in particular the commissioner's broader remarks about the world we are in today. And I actually intended to start on the same note, because I think when we are talking about our role and the challenges we face, now specifically in financial services, we should really also look around and see what's going on in the world around us. And this big picture is really not pretty at the moment, with democracy and international cooperation under pressure around the globe, and that at a time when we actually need more cooperation, not less, especially to address the climate crisis. I think for us here at ESA, a particular inflection point has been the Russian aggression against Ukraine earlier this year. And we have also reflected internally, what does that mean for us? What is actually our response to the situation? The answer to that is not so obvious, because of course our mandate is rather limited. We have no particular role when it comes to sanctions. We did anticipate that issues may come up with regard to state aid or energy markets and so on. So the most important conclusion was actually, in the light of this situation, what we need to be doing is to keep doing what we do. And that is basically working on the rule of law, working for cohesion in Europe. And I think it's often the absence of something that makes you really value what that is. So if you're not sure how much you appreciate the rule of law, you look maybe toward Moscow, or you look toward Tehran, and you see what the absence of the rule of law means. This is all really just a convoluted way of saying that the EA agreement is also part of the European peace project. And I think it's good to remind ourselves of that at the time when peace is disrupted on our very continent. Now, when it comes to safeguarding the rule of law, I really believe there's a special responsibility also for the financial sector. Providing for financial stability while safeguarding competitiveness, but also the rights of investors and consumers is extremely important. And failing to do so can have fatal consequences. In this regard, I have the feeling we are currently experiencing a real-life stress test. Energy price volatility, inflation, the economic turbulences we are seeing, these are actually fantastic ingredients for a real financial crisis. At the same time, and while the storm is really not over yet, I think we can already say that the improvements that have been made to financial supervision and to the financial system in Europe as a whole are definitely paying out. Now, let me say a couple of words about the role of the EEA agreement in this regard, especially when it comes to financial services. One thing that I think is quite remarkable is how the balance has shifted over time in participation. So when the EA agreement was signed in 1992, there were 7 states on the EFTA side and 12 on the EU side, or at the time, the European Community side. Today, the balance is 3 to 27. Population-wise, 6 million versus about 450 million. So one could actually ask the question, what's in it, not for us, but for our partner, what's in it for the European Union? Now, when it comes to financial services, I think we have learned a lot earlier today. In this area, all three EFTA states have very vibrant financial centers that bring a lot of innovation and dynamism to the single market, especially in terms of sustainability and digitalization. I could maybe mention more specifically, because I don't think it was mentioned earlier on. Liechtenstein, for example, has had a comprehensive blockchain legislation even before MiCA was started being discussed in the European Union. And I think that has been something very useful also for the process on the EU side. But we should not measure the value of the EA agreement only in quantitative or even qualitative terms. I think it is simply also a very useful blueprint, in fact, the gold standard for how the European Union can extend market access to non-EU states. How to do so while keeping rights and obligations in balance. And of course, one key ingredient for that recipe is the unique institutional setup, this two-pillar structure where we have actually on both sides separate surveillance mechanism and also separate judicial institutions. But it's also really a remarkably deep integration on substance. And what I find there particularly noteworthy is this notion that the EFTA states are not third countries for the purpose of the internal market. But actually, and that's a consequence of the way this legal construct was drafted, they are simply then regarded as, and the Protocol 1, I think, says, as member states of the European communities. We should, of course, update at some point the language in the EA agreement on that, because that, of course, has traveled further. Let me say a few words about the role of ESA in all of this. Of course, as all of you know, we are here to monitor the implementation of the EA agreement, and in doing so, our powers for surveillance mirror those of the EU Commission. So we can conduct audits and inspections, we can initiate infringement proceedings, and ultimately also lead those to the EFTA court. Substance-wise, we enforce the 4 freedoms. We ensure consumer protection, data protection. We verify food and veterinary safety. We inspect the safety of airports and maritime ports, all under this roof. So if you look at the combined expertise of all our staff here, I think you could say there is no safer place in Brussels than the EFTA House. We're also a competition authority and state aid authority. And of course, the biggest distinction, or the biggest thing that distinguishes us from the EU Commission, apart from size, is that we do not have a mandate when it comes to the legislative process. But our work has changed significantly in recent years. The trend on the EU side to delegate highly technical regulatory drafting to a broad range of EU agencies and to give them specific supervisory powers on top has had a deep impact on ESA. That is, of course, because many of these tasks have then, upon incorporation into the EEA agreement, been given to us. And the reason is, of course, the 2-pillar structure that underpins all of this. And obviously, we could not establish our own EFTA agencies on all of these issues. That would not only be, let's say, unpractical, but it would undermine the whole purpose of creating homogeneity in highly specialized areas. Now, when it comes to the role of ESA in financial services, the introduction of the EU financial supervisory authorities in 2011 brought, of course, particular challenges. We received many new competences, including to take binding decisions over market operators. And the way this was done was really nothing short of squaring the circle, because what was done was that careful and detailed delineation for this process was devised. Binding decisions are taken by ESA, but they are based on the drafts by the competent EU authorities. And in this way, we have been able to combine the expertise and I think the unique position of these authorities with the formal but also real decision-making power of ESA in the EFTA pillar. And a second element has, of course, been the participation of ESA and also of our national competent authorities in the boards of supervisors of these authorities without the right to vote. I will not elaborate on this further. You will hear in the panel later on about how this works in practice. But I really would also like to take this opportunity here to very warmly thank the authorities, but also the EU Commission and also the national competent authorities for their really, really excellent cooperation in all of this. There has been a lot of focus on this new role of ESA in financial services, but also in other areas. And there also have been some questions, actually, to what extent ESA can even act autonomously in this regard, since its work is based on drafts received from others. Again, you will hear, I think, in the panel in more detail about how this works in practice. But despite all this attention to these new mechanisms, we should not forget what remains the cornerstone of ESA's work in financial services. And that is our traditional surveillance role. This traditional surveillance role is indeed indispensable for the concept of one market, two pillars. So how does this work look like? As you all know, the key in financial services has grown exponentially in recent years, and therefore also in the EEA agreement, thousands and thousands of pages of rules. And to ensure that these rules are properly implemented in the EFTA states, ESA does three things. First, we monitor the timely transposition of the legal acts. And we do this, of course, not only in financial services, we do this systematically across the entire EEA. Essentially, it means taking hundreds of joint committee decisions, incorporating hundreds of EU legal acts every year, and checking if they have been transposed on time. If there is a delay, we remind the states, and if the situation is not remedied, we may sooner or later take them to the EFTA court. We actually have a recent example in financial services on this. Earlier this year, we had to refer Iceland to the EFTA court over the late transposition of 37 legal acts related to banking and securities markets. Secondly, we also make sure that these acts are transposed correctly, analyzing the national legislation in detail. We call these conformity assessments. In recent years, we have, for example, assessed the implementation of Solvency II in all three EEA-EFTA states. We have also almost finalized conformity assessments in the field of anti-money laundering. And another assessment is underway in the field of banking on CRD4 and CRD5. And as always, when issues are identified, we engage in a dialogue with the state concerned, and typically we solve these issues also through that dialogue. But of course, there's also always the option of going to the EFTA court. And thirdly, we may, of course, also take up implementation problems outside of these more systematic exercises, acting on the basis of complaints or on our own initiative when we detect issues. For example, we have recently opened formal infringement proceedings against Norway regarding rules and administrative practices that restrict ownership in banks and insurance undertakings. We are of the view that these are not compatible with EEA law, and in particular not with harmonized secondary EEA law. And to be fair and balanced, let me also mention that we have asked Liechtenstein also some questions regarding the implementation of specific aspects of financial services acquis, but we are not at the stage of formal infringement proceedings in this regard. And in fulfilling these traditional surveillance functions, ESA very closely cooperates, again, with the Commission, with the EU supervisory authorities. And we have, for example, accompanied the European Banking Authority in visits to Norway and Iceland for the purpose of assessing anti-money laundering standards. And we hope to do the same with Liechtenstein. Now, before getting too deep into these issues that will be addressed very soon by the real experts on this panel, I would like to zoom out again. The two-pillar system of the EEA agreement relies on the trust between the two sides that each side will enforce the common legal standards so as to create maximum homogeneity. But as the law grows more complex, How can the much smaller side with much smaller institutions keep up? How can we be sure that ESA truly fulfills its monitoring role in financial services in all its aspects? And of course, in law, nothing is truly certain, but we definitely have the ingredients that are needed to fully fulfill our mandate. First, there is our independence. It is really worth reminding that ESA is independent and therefore fully capable of following the law, even where that may be uncomfortable politically. And I think our track record in this regard speaks for itself. Second, there is expertise. The financial services acquis may be highly complex and technical, but so are many other areas of internal market law. For example, ESA is involved in highly complex decisions and assessments regarding electronic network codes, carbon capture and storage, and the calculation of emission reduction targets, to name just a few. We manage in these other areas as well, and we do so thanks to the incredible varied skill of our staff, but also thanks to the third ingredient, which is cooperation. I would really like to end on this note. The trend to transfer binding decision-making powers to agencies on the EU side has been a huge challenge for the EEA agreement. It has led to difficult political discussions in our states, and it has led to complex institutional arrangements across the two pillars. But it has also led to closer cooperation and greater exchange between both sides on substance issues. And we see that. We see that in our participation in the work of the EU supervisory authorities. We see that in the highly interactive, cooperative process that leads to ESA's binding decisions under this framework. And we see it in this very room, with all of you coming together to discuss the future of financial services in the EEA. Thank you.